hand, although now I'm not seeing you. I think that we're actually okay to just, I think there are, we'll see how this goes, but I think there aren't too many people on this call. I think you can probably just speak up. So unmute yourself and speak up if you have something to say.
The systemic issues that we see right now that are at the root of the protests and the experience of people of color in the United States are systemic for a reason. And if we don't all recognize our own biases and prejudices, we can never get at that systemic greater problem.
And I was going to say kind of in a different way, but that if we're trying to analyze the things that you described first, our schools, our communities, the things that are part of the systemic racism, we're going to analyze those. We want to make sure that we're coming at them from an unbiased perspective. And in order to be able to analyze the root cause of what's creating this systemic racism, then we have to be able to make sure that we're coming at it from a clear, or at least as clear as possible, perspective. Does that make sense?
You have to see it in yourself before you can really, not see it in others, but before you can begin to understand it in others and in a more broad spectrum. Understanding those biases on the root level in your own life is an important first step.
Yeah. That was Abigail, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's correct.
It also feels like, I think we want to be inherently good and we perceive bias as inherently bad. And so we're quick to say, oh, I'm not that. When the reality is we're all that, and that's okay. It's how we respond to that makes the difference. And so I had a conversation with somebody today where I said, everybody is racist and it's just how we respond that's the difference. And he immediately pushed back and he was like, no, I'm not. And I was like, I'm not calling you a bad word. But I think bias is the same thing. We've all got them. And so if we can just own that, then we're like 3 steps ahead of the game. But we want to be good people. And so we just perceive this as the antithesis of that.
Yeah.
I agree. It's a stigma that we give ourselves. We don't want to be biased. We don't want to be racist, but human. We're human. And to a degree, I mean, that's just who we are. Said, we handle it and how we live it, that makes the difference.
I think a lot of times we don't even know that we're racist. We don't think about it because that's the way the system is. And, we're not doing anything to make it like that.
I'm going to hop in and I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Barbara's daughter, Tanya, otherwise known as TJ. She invited me tonight. So if you don't recognize me, it's because I'm related to her. The National Geographic did a study not long ago, maybe a couple of years, and they said the first thing you notice about somebody is their race. Their second thing is their sex. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's just how we catalog and categorize people and how we live through the world. And it makes it easier for us that when we see somebody, we just automatically see those things, such as when you see a chair, it's a chair. When you see a table, it's a table. So trying to say we don't see color, trying to say we're not racist, trying to say we don't notice those things is wrong, because we do. If we didn't, there's no way we could actually exist in the world.
Thanks, Tanya. We're glad that you're here. Stephen McIntosh Are you with us? Can you put your hand up? Yeah.
I can do that, Sarah.
I don't know. Stephen, are you like, I did not recognize you. I was like, who's that guy in orange? I texted Jenny because I could see your hand up. But I didn't recognize you. It's been a while. You've been like in the woods for, yeah, that must be part of it.
Is it this? Yeah.
That could be it too. Did you have something that you wanted to add? I know it was a while ago that you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, I was, I mean, I agree with a lot that was said. I only put my hand up to sort of, I was willing to get the ball rolling, but there's been a lot of comments already. I think just reacting to the last comment that TJ made, I mean, I think, that is, of course, our animalistic, built-in abilities to survive. The trick is obviously, what do you do with those associations? And
Glenn, I don't want to get down
and I think what we saw in the video is, and what we know from implicit bias is we've got a narrative, we've got an auto response that when we see means this means that, and so the trick is to rewire that over time and have it mean something different, which takes work. So back to the why start with implicit bias? Well, this is an inside job, and if we want societal change, it has to happen, each of us individually doing our own work to understand what's in the way of us recognizing what's wrong with our systems, and therefore having a willingness not to just sit by, because doing nothing is complicit and contributing to the problem, but then being able to recognize it and being willing to do something different. So
yeah. Thank you. A reminder, y'all, if you are not, I love that we're able to I think we're making this work, just speak up when you want to speak up. But if you're not talking, just a reminder to keep yourself on mute so we can cut down on the little noises. I found myself wondering this week if, kind of processing this out loud, but I feel like when we come to the issue of racism or white supremacy, whichever name you choose, because of a string of killings at the hands of police or vigilantes, there's the potential for it to become very divisive very quickly, because of course we all know good cops. We know folks that are in law enforcement that are good people in it. So I find that the conversation can get shut down very quickly because of that. But if we come at it by talking about implicit bias, it's saying, I do believe that your bias was at play here, but it's also not something that you harbor that I don't. If I can recognize it in myself, if we can recognize that it is something that gets all of us, and that this is a collective problem and that we are in this together, my hope at least is that helps to move us forward in a way. I'm going to go ahead, unless somebody has something really urgent to say about that slide, I'm going to move us to our next one. So Varna, just a recap for any that were not able to watch the TED Talk, she gives a 3-point charge to her audience in that talk. The first is get out of denial. The second is move towards rather than away. And the third is when you see something, say something. So I just want to look at each of those a little more in depth. So that first one, get out of denial. What she says here is stop trying to be good people, rather be real people. So I won't go through each of these questions one by one. I'll just name them all and then y'all can respond. But what does that mean? I think we already kind of went there. Jenny Brooks, thank you. What does it mean for you? What's challenging about that? And do you have an example of a time that you made that transition from being a good person to being a real person? What do y'all think about that?
I think we all want to be good people because we think of opposites, either we're good or we're bad. And we don't realize that we can be good people and still have biases. And so we have to recognize that even though we're good people, doesn't mean we don't have faults or we don't see biases.
That's interesting, Barbara. I hadn't really thought of it that way before, but it's almost because I just got done reading Richard Rohr, and he talks all about how we need to get out of this binary way of thinking, that might be part of the problem. Thank you.
I think it's also, I've heard people use, white supremacy, racist, the systemic racism is the air we breathe. It's the world we exist in. And it makes me think of something my father told me. He grew up in rural Mississippi, and he said everybody was poor, but nobody really noticed it because everybody was poor. Everybody kind of lived in the same community, and there were people who had more than others and people who had less, but there was sort of a standard that was different than the rest of the country because everybody was just there, and that's the community they lived in. So we live in a racist society, and if we live in a society or in a community that is mostly white, with mostly white people, that's all we know. And we don't see it because it's the air we breathe, it's the water we drink, it's all around us.
Indeed.
That's true.
Well, part of the problem is that we all think we know what good is, and we don't. It's a very, very vague term, and we're pointing that out in what we're saying. There are good and bad things in all people. The president's caught a lot of grief, and justifiably so, in my view, about his comment about good people on both sides. But then on the other hand, there is good in some of those people too. I mean, the good in all those people. But it's a relative term. It's not a clear term at all. Very hard to get your hands around that word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I keep thinking about people who come across as nice all the time, but it doesn't feel genuine. And I think that sometimes, that good can come, how we define good can be I can come across as being kind to you, but does that mean I'm being real and getting to value you? Or does that just mean I'm following in whatever rules I think society has set for me?
Mm-hmm.
Picking up on that, I mean, real can be ugly. What somebody really is can be something they're trying to hide for good reason.
I think it means just be honest, don't you think?
Fair. To be fair.
Fair?
To be fair with everyone,
I'm a teacher. For those of you who don't know me, I teach elementary school, and I feel like that's kind of a really pervasive part of my life, and it's a lens through which I see a lot of issues. And for me, when I think of kids following the rules, I can get the kids to sit quietly in their seat and be good and be quiet and say, yes, ma'am. I can get them to do that, but that's not as authentic as if they're getting in there and getting their hands dirty. And sometimes to get along truly with their peers, they're going to have to work through an argument and not just say, yes, ma'am, and be quiet. And so to me, being real is kind of that, dealing with the argument or dealing with the fidgeting or because those are symptomatic of other things. And to be good is to cover those things up so that the real issue is never really discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Becky. It makes me think about the city of Memphis. We're described often as a city that is full of people who are authentic, who are real, who are living with struggle. We've been through it, right? We've seen the worst from people in our history as a city. And because we have dealt with that struggle and fought with these demons, we feel like we get it in a way that maybe others don't as Memphians. And I think you see that somewhat now in the protests that are taking place in the city of Memphis, the singing of Amazing Grace yesterday, the just amazing, touching moments of authenticity that you see here in Memphis. And it's something we all have to live into in our own lives as well. It's not just a civic realness. It's something that we each have to live into as we become or are Memphians. So I think there's some authenticity baked into Memphis is what I'm trying to say.
Tonight, when the mayor met with the leaders of the different protest sections, came together and they met at City Hall with some of the city leaders and some of the ministers. Mayor spoke, Mayor Strickland spoke, and then one of the leaders of the protest spoke. And something was said about they're meeting together for the next 4 weeks to try to come to some resolutions. It's going to be hard, they said. It's going to be difficult. They're going to hurt some feelings sometimes, but sometimes you've got to dig and hurt and to get the truth out. I'm so hoping that something comes up this time. This happened before and it kind of faded away in the background, but I'm hoping, I'm going to keep my eye on the news and see if anything comes from it. But
he also was asked tonight, he stood by I Am a Man statue.
Yes.
And one of the questions that was asked at the end is, what is he doing about MIFA? And he said, I'm meeting with these leaders for 4 weeks, and that's our attention. So I hope something comes from it, but I'm afraid maybe he's using this as a
platform for something else.
Yeah, not to handle some of the other issues.
But there are a lot of issues. Oh, there are a lot of issues. Yeah.
He said he did a lot of listening today, too. You know, that his role was to listen and to hear. And as a white man, he didn't even know all the questions to ask. So he was in the process of listening. And that's why these 4 meetings, he was hopeful he would learn from that and that they could come up with an action plan. So, Barbara, I felt positive about it.
I hope so. I mean, I am, but this has happened in the past. You know, the city leaders, and this happened when they were blocking the bridge to Arkansas, remember?
Yes, that's true.
And so I'm just hopeful that I have a lot of good feelings about Mayor Strickland. I'm hoping that he's diligent and not just being a good person, you know. Mm-hmm.
Bringing us back to that first question.
But by saying he's listening, he's letting the people of color teach him instead of doing the work to learn himself, and instead of really putting the work in there to figure out what's going on. It's great to listen. You can sit in a room and listen to somebody for 20 hours and walk out and know what they think, but it hasn't changed anything at all unless you've actually thought it through, put the work in there, and done the work in yourself. Mm-hmm. So I would hope that I don't live in Memphis, but I would hope that he's doing more than just listening, because he can listen for 4 meetings and then say, well, I listened and everything's good now.
Building on the comment about doing the work yourself that you just made, and back to this question of getting out of denial, I think several people commented earlier about, wanting to look good and not being authentic. I think for me, there's a piece of this that's, and a part that makes it really challenging is the internal denial to myself that I don't really care to look at, or it's easier certainly not to. So it's, being my own authentic self and being willing to look at what my biases are, and then, having the courage, or maybe just the curiosity to explore it enough to want to do something differently. It's a lot easier not to. So part of that getting out of denial is self-denial, and at least as I think about it.
It's also not wanting to give up the power that we have. And if we're honest, or I'm honest, yes, I want them to have all the rights, but I don't want to have to give up what I have too, which is selfish, but that's part of my denial.
That's authentic.
Jenny, you had said earlier that you were having a conversation with somebody today, and you made the comment that we're all racist, and his response was, well, I'm not. I mean, you might be, but I'm not. I think to me, that's always been one of the most challenging, is holding that as truth. Because I've had conversations, similar to that, where I kind of own my own racism. And if you're talking to somebody who up and down, well, that's your thing. That's what I find the most challenging in this.
So this is not really related to the question, but it is about that, since that's like the second or third time that that's come up. I'm reading a book right now. It's pretty popular, but by Ibram X. Kendi. And he talks, and I think it's really important that the word racist doesn't have to be pejorative. Like, we've made it pejorative, but really it's a description. And you can say something racist one minute and then not be racist or anti-racist the next minute. And that even he, as this author of this book, as a Black man, called How to Be Anti-Racist, slips into some things that are racist sometimes. And so I think sort of taking away the pejorative nature of that and looking at it as objective fact about what we're saying can kind of take away some of the emotionally charged feeling. If someone says that was racist, and our instinct is to go, no, it's not, I'm not racist. But just to sort of use it as a description of like, no, that was, but that doesn't mean you're a bad person. Just use it as a description.
Yeah, Becky, that book there's some grace in that, the way he presents it, right? You can have some self-forgiveness. And then the other thing that was really helpful in that book for me was understanding that being an anti-racist is, taking an active role to do something that, disbands, gets rid of, racism. And that's just sort of a thermometer that made it easier for me to understand, unless you're there, then you're a racist. But it's okay in the context as you just described it. It's doesn't have to be pejorative. But having that other reference point of what being an anti-racist is just was really helpful for me.
I also think there's some grace in knowing that however good your intentions are, that you're human, and so you're gonna fail from time to time, and that doesn't make you a bad person. I tend to think in very black and white terms, and so either you are this or you are that, and so I find grace in knowing that just because I may have thought something or said something or done something that was driven by my bias doesn't mean that I'm not, on the whole, a good, real person. So there's a place where I find comfort, sort of like Sunday morning, like the prayer of confession is my favorite thing ever, because it's a place where we all acknowledge that we screwed up, and so now we're just going to try again. So it's sort of, I've got that. I appreciate that flexibility.
I think it was Stephen who said at the beginning, it just starts with each of us. Our small little steps we take every day, the small little steps we take, the meetings that the people that we meet, the people that we have conversations with, that we just look at and smile at and just hello, and just be able to, those are baby steps. I know that's baby steps, but if it starts with me, that's all I can do is in my little way, do that. And that's it, that's all.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Barbara. I'm trying to feel y'all's energy through the screen. Are we ready to move on to the next slide? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So that second charge that she gave us was move towards rather than away. And she was more specific than that. She said move towards young Black men rather than away from them. She says biases are the stories that we make up about people before we know who they really are. She also used that story of her and her Korean American friend walking, I think at night, I could be making that up, and being lost and seeing a Black man across the street, and how she immediately moved towards him and, oh, okay, this is a safe, good person for us to ask directions from. Whereas her friend, and immediately owning it, sort of did the opposite and didn't think of this as somebody that they should be asking directions from. So just wanted to remind you all of that story. So biases are the stories we make up about people before we know who they really are. So where do you see this happening? Relatedly, where does society move away from young Black men in particular rather than towards them? What does that look like for us?
We see it on TV a lot, on news clips, on programming. Young Black men are angry, they do nasty things. Particularly in Memphis, we hear about murder all the time, and Black on Black murder. And we get this feeling that they're not safe.
Two that most immediately come to mind for me are number one, employment. Those of us in positions to hire people. Black men are unemployed to a larger extent than those who of other racial and demographic breakdowns. And then the second big one that comes to mind for me is in our educational choices. And that comes with respect to how schools are funded. It comes with respect to where we send our kids to school, and how those choices often inadvertently, but could affect people of color in the city of Memphis.
Well, and branching off of that, Jeremy, again, as a school teacher, we see it a lot in the numbers of suspensions and expulsions. Black males, and this is again much younger than like men, this would be boys, but still Black males are suspended and expelled exponentially more than any other demographic. And we see it for things like, if I gave this example the other day at a conversation I was having with young adults. If a white girl threw a chair then man, she has got something going on at home. She is struggling. We need to get her to the counselor because clearly she's got some anger issues to work out. But if a black male throws a chair, you need to suspend him because that's inexcusable. You can't throw chairs in the class. And I mean, it's the same conversation time and time again. And I think societally, we don't even think about how racist that is, that the same action can get different results just based on the kid's skin color.
Follow up on that, Becky. Go one step further. Look at our prisons, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, prisons are the next step after suspensions and expulsions. So, yeah.
I'm not in Memphis, so I don't know if does Memphis have a ban the box where employers can't ask about criminal history on their applications? Because in Philadelphia, I live in Philadelphia, we do, and that actually is a great way to increase employment if you aren't able to ask until you have a conditional offer on the table to do a criminal background check. And that's, I don't know if Memphis has that or not, but that's one of the big, with the way we criminalize and the way our laws are geared towards penalizing people of color, it's harder for them to get jobs if they have to put on their applications that they have a criminal history.
Yeah, to answer that question directly, some of our major employers have adopted that, but it is not a government stated situation. It's not a legal incident, and certainly it's not for state, county, city employees at this time. It is active right now. Many of you probably know a piece that Mayor Harris is trying to get pushed through, and he's working hard. It's a very active issue and one of the things on his agenda that he's seeking support for currently.
The other place I see this is when a person of color is killed by law enforcement, the first thing that we begin to learn about is their history and their background. And it's not about what happened that day in that moment. It's about what happened however many years ago. And we society use that to paint this person as deserving of death with no due process. And so I think that's one of the places where I see us as a whole do that a lot, is when they're the victim and we quickly change that narrative to make them the perpetrator.
Well, and they wouldn't even have that marijuana charge or whatever it is they have if they had been a white male in the first place. Like, it's a big cyclical thing. And again, that is not because white males don't smoke pot. It's because the police don't prosecute them.
There's actually studies that show that white youth use and deal drugs more than young people of color, but they get arrested at a much lower rate.
The stop and frisk policies that were adopted in certain cities a few years ago actually showed that Caucasian people are more likely to have some kind of contraband in their vehicle or wherever, or on their person, than a person of color was. It's still, people of color were targeted more often, but the white people had more contraband.
Huh. Interesting.
Oh.
Those are not my birds.
They're my birds. They're my birds. I don't know how to mute myself and share a screen with y'all, so I'm sorry. I hope they're not too distracting. I'm sure that they understand themselves as my birds as well, you know. What about that second question, or that second quote? She says at some point, you're not going to get comfortable until you get uncomfortable. I'm wondering if anybody has, and it might just be too early to do this, but I'm curious to see if somebody has an example of some time of time that this happened to you when you had to get uncomfortable before getting more comfortable.
Well, it's darn sure time to be uncomfortable with what we're seeing. And this incident, it's interesting that this one incident has created finally a dialogue when so many before haven't, but better late than never, I suppose. But I've been thinking about a couple of examples. So let's see, let me look at myself. There I am. So I look like a Republican. I've become conscious of that when I've gone to Democratic Party events in Shelby County. And people, particularly people of color, if they don't know me, will kind of look at me like, what are you doing here? You know, I mean, I get this feeling that they presume, and on the flip side of that, I was talking with a relative today and saying something about what was on the news. And his comment was, oh, well, yeah, I don't listen to the Communist News Network, meaning CNN. And if I get any news, it's through Fox, you know, Fox News. And I didn't say anything to him about that. I could have said, wait a minute, you know, and made an issue out of it. So it hits on both sides. And you can be white and have, you know, people's biases against you come out just like that. And I'm sure you've all felt that. People will presume, oh, you're white, you're against me. Sometimes you get that. So I mean, it cuts every which way. And it's time for us all to be uncomfortable.
Perhaps it's the only way we know that we're doing the work right is if we get uncomfortable. Yeah.
I have an example, and it relates to what I was talking about earlier. Again, as a teacher, earlier this year, I had a student that, and this was maybe like the first or second month of school, and he was balling up his fist, like constantly, whenever anyone said anything that bothered him, and he would raise his voice and he'd kind of snap back at me, and me kind of went, and this is a black boy, and me wanting to kind of nip this like behavior in the bud and make sure that he called the parents in for a conference or sent him a note. And I was like, I'm really concerned about some aggressive reactions I've seen from this child, and I'd really like to talk about them. And the parents came in and asked that the principal be there too. And they were like, so first of all, that was racist. You can't call our child aggressive, because again, if a white girl had done that, you wouldn't say she was aggressive. You were saying she was having some trouble coping and we needed to deal with it or something like that. Labeling my child aggressive is racist, and we need to talk about that. And I'm sitting here going, I'm not racist. I didn't mean that. I'm just trying to get my kid to behave. And it was like the most uncomfortable. Our principal is also a black man. And so it was me with the black principal and these two black parents, and me trying to be like, I promise I'm not racist, but having to examine that what I said was racist. And that having to sort of re-examine that and what I meant and how I framed the situation. And I was super uncomfortable, but it kind of got me to a new realization of how I interact with my kids, who I call my babies. I mean, I love them, and they are part of my family, and I would fight for them. And to realize that I had this sort of underlying racism about my babies was abhorrent to me, but I had to get there before I could fix it.
How did it turn out, hon? How did it?
I acknowledged that that was racist and that I hadn't realized it and didn't mean to offend it, and that I was going to reflect on that and do better. And I said, also, we need to figure out how he can stop raising his voice and balling his fist, but to identify those as the actions of what I was seeing instead of labeling it something that didn't need to be labeled.
Did they accept that? Did they?
Yes, and we had a great relationship the rest of the year.
Good.
Thank you, Becky.
I'm a really big fan of Brene Brown's, and I don't think this is the exact quote, but she talks about how vulnerability breeds vulnerability. So as soon as someone else will open up and share their not proud moment or deepest fears or whatever it may be, that it opens up for other people to do the same. I did some training years ago called Capturing Kids' Hearts, and it was about, I'm a teacher as well, and one of the things they asked us to do as leaders was to ask two people important to us in our lives what's one thing or one or two things that I have done in a relationship that's like hurt our relationship. And that was very hard to do. But I actually only remember one of the people I asked really well because it was a candid, vulnerable answer. And it was my best friend, and it was just really powerful for her to say what the thing, and for me to be able to respond and try to change and ask for forgiveness for what I had done between us. And that was 10 years ago. So.
Thanks, Virginia.
Anybody
else have a story? Another one? Yeah, Stephen.
So yeah, I'll be brief because I know we're getting long or time, but so another person who talks about the need or to be willing to be uncomfortable is Brian Stevenson, and he talks about the 4 things that are necessary to bring change in the world, and that's one of them. And for me, when I read his book, there was that, and another one of the 4 is get proximate, and so that prompted me to want to. Well, I don't know about want to. It prompted me to go ahead and spend some time in the prison with some of our incarcerated brothers and sisters and citizens, and it was uncomfortable. It's not a place I've spent a lot of time hanging out, and of course all the biases we talked about earlier about what those people might have done and who they are and why they're in there and all of that. But the rest of that statement is, that's necessary to get comfortable. And, for me, I can't do it now because of COVID, but it's my most fulfilling single thing that I do consistently each week in terms of relationships and learning about, the other people that I share our city and this planet with and what their life experiences are. And I love going there. I'm super comfortable, but it didn't start that way.
Interesting.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm going to move us to our last slide, which is the last charge. She says, when you see something, say something. Usually we hear this in the context of like airports or busy train stations. When you see something, say something. She means something a little different here. And that's simply, when you hear a relative say something or anybody say something, bigoted, say something about it. So a couple questions. Have you ever regretted not confronting racial or other prejudice when you heard it or saw it? And what does saying something look like right now for us as individuals, maybe as a church or as a society? That's a whole lot for having 6 minutes left. Anyone want to take a stab at it?
Sarah, can I make one comment real quick?
Is that Marjorie? I hear you. I can't see you.
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, I did that webinar last night that you sent me the link to about how to raise children that aren't the next Amy Cooper. And one of my notes that I wrote down was that the saying something doesn't have to be a challenge. It could just simply be saying something. So if a person makes a comment that you take to be a racist comment, all you have to say is, that sounds sort of racist to me. It doesn't have to be challenging. It can just be saying. And I think that sounds doable instead of the Or are you going to raise the challenge every time? And just to give somebody else pause to reflect, just like Becky mentioned in her situation.
Thank you for that. I think I just cut somebody off. Who was?
When I first came to St. Jude, of course, I was getting used to a different the culture of being there and trying to fit in. And we're in the lunchroom one day, and a coworker said something about she's connecting me to East Tennessee, like she'd gone there, and the person had made some comment about only Black people in Memphis or something like that. I don't remember exactly. And I think like in the moment I said, oh, that's interesting, or something like that. It kind of like acknowledged it as acceptable, but like as soon as I had said it, and I think I was trying to fit in at the time, but as soon as I said it, I was like, whoa, no, that's not. And I've regretted ever since then, like saying that comment, because I know I did have Black coworkers in that room at the same time. So I think that's been something that I've at least tried to watch for.
Indeed. Thanks, Alicia.
I'm a people pleaser by nature. It's just part of my family origin story. And so there is not enough time in the world to list the places where I did not say something and I regret. There's just not. And so I am more aware of it now than ever, not just because of what's going on in the world, but because I'm raising a biracial child. And there's a big part of his experience I cannot relate to. And so more so now than before, I've begun using my voice and saying things, but there's still, just last night on the front porch of my parents' house, somebody was saying something and I could see him getting frustrated. And so we just sort of made eye contact and did hand motions, and I sent him inside instead of saying something. It was just easier. And for me, I'm sure it wasn't easier for him, and I'm not sure what damage that's done to our relationship. We haven't talked about it yet. But, it's part of my privilege that I live with every day.
Thanks, Jenny. Barbara, is that a hand, or are you fixing something on your, I think you're fixing something.
I'd be curious to hear about, because, there's 1 minute left, what people think of what the church needs to be saying.
I'm glad you said that, Anne, because that's what I wanted to say. And I didn't have the courage to say it until you asked the question. So thank you. Isn't it uncontroversial to say Black Lives Matter right now?
What?
Can the church not just say that? I think the church should say that.
Why not say that?
Oh,
Black matter, all lives matter. All lives matter.
Yes, but when we say all lives matter, we sort of sidestep that Black lives matter, because it's important to say not all lives matter, but Black lives specifically matter.
The other way I've heard that is all lives don't matter until Black lives matter. And until we can say Black lives matter,
I like that.
we really can't claim that all lives matter. Yeah.
That's good.
The book I'm reading calls it gaslighting or something like that, where we take something and to make it more comfortable, we get away from what it starts as. And so saying all lives matter, take away from the deal that Black lives matter.
I would want the church, and I will speak that I am an ordained minister and also a lawyer. So, and this is where I want to go in my career when I grow up, is having the church stand up and say, for the people who are using the church, for the president who stands in front of a church with a Bible that's not his own, for a photo op, this is not the church. This is not the God we believe in. This is not our religion. This is not our faith. This is what we believe. Black Lives Matter. Everybody matters. Love matters. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Mm-hmm.
Y'all, it is 8:30, and I would love to spend another hour with you. But I'm seeing myself in the dark, and I see that it is 8:30. I do want to really quickly, you know, Varna's got this in her 3-point charge. I hear, and I don't know that she intended this, probably not. But I hear sort of a reflection of the Christian ethic or the Christian worldview, because she says the first thing is to get real, like stop being good, get real, which is confession. I mean, that's just naming, as Anne would put it, this is how it is, you know, in my life. And then that second part, walking towards rather than away, we see that that is the pattern that Jesus, you know, that's the pattern that his life took. It was, like Stephen said, it's getting proximate, right? It's walking towards people, and even people that scare us, rather than away, and being formed in discipleship that way. And then the third thing, saying something when you see something, is it's Christian freedom, right? It's the courage that's found in living in light of resurrection hope. So I thought that was interesting, that kind of perfectly mirrored each other, at least in my view. I'm not going to ask you all to name your 1-sentence hopes for yourselves and for the church, but I am going to invite you to just take that with you and hold it gently and pray over it. And know that this is a conversation that we intend to continue. We're going to start a 21-day racial equity challenge probably on Sunday. We're trying to get our whole list together and make sure that we vet it correctly, and that we're not putting material out there that we shouldn't be putting out there. But this was all based on Myers Park Presbyterian in Charlotte, North Carolina. They, I think, were the ones that came up with this idea. Marjorie brought it to our attention, and Jenny has been hard at work kind of getting it together. So we are hoping that we start that on Sunday. And then we're also looking towards doing a more involved anti-racism study in the fall. These are plans that are just starting to be put in motion, so I don't have any more details than that, but that 21-day challenge will be kind of leaving some breadcrumbs as we move towards the fall, and hopefully doing something much more intentional where we can have lots more conversations like this. So thank you all so much for being present. This has been encouraging. I thank you for your honesty and your vulnerability, and I thank you for your compassion and your love and just your presence here. So thank you. Is there somebody that would close us briefly in prayer before we go? Before I call somebody out?
Right. As dusk leads us into night, I pray for light in a midnight sky. I pray gratitude for those who will gather in an evening and listen and ask hard questions. And I thank you for the gift of your church. And I pray that you help us to be faithful. It's in Christ's name that I trust and I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Sarah, thank you for doing this.
Yep, thanks, Sarah.
My pleasure. Thank you all for being here. Have
Thanks
a good
all.
night.
No.
Night.